p.m. Pacific to once again maintain a constant orbit lower than the space station, this time just 2.5 kilometers below. This was a shorter burn, lasting just over 30 seconds.
During the approach, SpaceX flight controllers will work in tandem with the NASA team in Houston to maneuver Dragon Endeavour to the proper attitude. They will initialize the navigation sensors used for the methodical approach to station. They'll also activate and test out a number of systems on Dragon, including bidirectional communications with the station using the C2V2 system. C2V2 stands for Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles. It sets up a data stream from Dragon to the station, giving another path for Dragon telemetry to come to the ground and giving an additional command capability to astronauts aboard the station.
At approximately 10:03 p.m. Pacific, Draco thrusters on Dragon will fire for the approach. Well, this actually just happened, right? We just had the approach initiation burn here just a couple of minutes ago. And all of that went really smoothly. It helped to swing Dragon about 2.5 kilometers below space station and just about 7 kilometers behind it. And eventually it will help us get to 400 meters directly below the space station. This maneuver also moves Dragon inside one of 2 checkpoints around the station that requires a set of go, no-go poles with the different control teams. That first checkpoint is called the approach ellipsoid, or as you might hear it called, the AE. It's an imaginary shape measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers and is essentially a 3-dimensional oval. Before Dragon is given permission to move inside that approach ellipsoid, the capsule is configured to be on what is known as a 24-hour safe trajectory, which means that if Dragon lost all control to its thrusters, it would be at least 24 hours before its trajectory would move inside the approach ellipsoid.
The NASA and SpaceX teams will do a go-no-go poll to move Dragon inside of the keep-out sphere, another checkpoint that consists of an imaginary sphere around the station with a radius of 200 meters. Flight controllers use this to monitor all arriving and departing vehicles. This is another chance to confirm all the guidance, navigation, and control systems are working correctly on Dragon before moving closer to station. It carries a similar requirement on the orbital trajectory that if Dragon were to somehow lose control of its thrusters it and the space station would be safe for 4 orbits, or about 6 hours, rather than the 24 hours required to enter the approach ellipsoid. Once Dragon arrives at 400 meters below station, it will be at what is known as waypoint 0 and will be the first checkpoint during our approach. The vehicle can hold here at 400 meters, but if all of its systems check out, it can continue to approach to waypoint 1.
Dragon's move from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1 will swing it up and out in front of the space station, arriving at a distance of approximately 220 meters. At this point, it will be on what is called the docking axis, which essentially means it is directly in front of the docking port. The crew are headed to the forward-most port on the space station, which is called the Node 2 forward and is the Earth-facing port. Dragon has docked to Node 2, also known as Harmony, for all the crewed missions so far because that's where both international docking adapters are located and installed for new commercial spacecraft flights, as well as any other future spacecraft that use the international docking standard.
Once Dragon is only 20 meters away at waypoint 2, the spacecraft focuses on aligning its docking system with the international docking adapter. We may hear the call-out CHOP, which stands for Crew Hands-Off Point, a little less than 30 seconds before docking. At this point, any aborts will have to be done automatically by Dragon.
And then it will be the time we have been eagerly anticipating, the grand arrival when our crew arrives at the space station. We are targeting that contact at 11:28 a.m. Pacific. 11:28 p.m. Pacific, and Dragon will fly in and make contact with the IDA, giving us what we call soft capture. The soft capture ring then retracts until sensors indicate it's time for 12 hooks to drive in place to give us a hard capture and firmly secure Dragon to its new home on the space station. From there, the station crew, namely NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, will manually pressurize the vestibule, or the area between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch. Meanwhile, umbilicals that provide power, audio, and data connections from the station to Dragon are put in place. Then it's time for leak checks, hatch opening, which is currently timeline to come a little more than 2 hours following docking.
Now, as we continue to count down to docking, let's take a closer look at the Dragon spacecraft hall. There are 2 windows on the spacecraft, plus one under the nose cone. The nose cone opens shortly after launch to expose the forward bulkhead thrusters and docking mechanism that will connect with the space station. Dragon's trunk holds solar cells, which power Dragon while it's in free flight, and the trunk can also carry unpressurized cargo.
Dragon has 16 Draco thrusters that can be used in space to help navigate the spacecraft to its destination. Each provides about 90 pounds of force, but that doesn't include the 8 Super Draco thrusters used for an abort, which are no longer active once the crew is in orbit.
And for those of you following along, you'll know that the Dragon spacecraft has played a significant role in advancing our future in space by safely transporting crew to and from the International Space Station. There are currently 4 Dragon spacecraft supporting human spaceflight missions that have docked to the station. That's Endeavour, Resilience, Endurance, and Freedom.
As you saw in the video, Crew-8 are on board Endeavour, which previously flew NASA's SpaceX Demo Mission 2, Crew-2, and Crew-6, in addition to AX-1, the first commercial astronaut mission to the space station. Altogether, the reusable Dragon spacecraft has completed 7 human spaceflight missions on behalf of NASA and visited the station 38 times under NASA's commercial resupply and commercial crew programs.
Over the last 23 years, crews aboard the space station have completed thousands of scientific and educational experiments, and Crew-8 is prepared to add to that growing number. Crew-8 will conduct hundreds of science experiments and technology demonstrations during their mission. They will spend several months working in our orbital laboratory. Having more crew members on board significantly expands the amount of research that can be conducted. This crew will conduct new scientific research to prepare for human exploration beyond low Earth orbit and benefit humanity on Earth. Experiments include stem cells to create organoid models to study degenerative diseases, studying the effects of microgravity and UV radiation on plants at a cellular level, and testing whether wearing pressure cuffs on the legs could prevent fluid shifts and reduce health problems in astronauts.
These are just a few of the more than 200 scientific experiments and technology demonstrations taking place during Crew-8's mission. During their mission, the crew will perform dozens of investigations sponsored by the ISS National Laboratory. These projects span a wide range of disciplines, from life and physical sciences to advanced materials, technology development, in-space production applications, and even student-led research. Results from these studies will bring value to humanity, furthering our ability to explore and enabling a robust market in low Earth orbit. So again, we are really looking forward to docking, but let's talk a little bit more about some of the science that is flying on board. So one of those is a human brain organoid model for neurodegenerative disease and drug discovery called H-bond, and it studies the mechanisms behind neuroinflammation, which is a common feature of neurodegenerative disorders. Researchers create organoids using patent-derived iPSCs, which are induced pluripotent stem cells from patients who have Parkinson's disease and primary progressive multiple sclerosis. The 6th Space Station Organoid investigation funded by the National Stem Cell Foundation, H-bond, includes for the first time Alzheimer's iPSCs and testing of the effects of drugs in development to treat neuroinflammation. Results could help improve diagnostics, provide insights into the effects of aging, accelerate drug discovery, and even identify therapeutic targets for patients suffering from neurodegenerative diseases. The organoid models also could provide a way to anticipate how extended spaceflight affects the brain and supportive development of countermeasures. Another experiment that is flying includes plants, and we do have a variety of plant experiments that fly and are being grown at any given time on the International Space Station, for example, tomatoes. But another one that's flying is and sometimes even the plants can be used for food, which is exciting, and the crew always looks forward to having fresh food on board the International Space Station. But the study on plant responses against the stresses of microgravity and high ultraviolet radiation in space, or plant UVB, examines how stress from microgravity, UV radiation, and the combination of the two affect plants at the molecular, cellular, and whole organism levels. Results could increase understanding of plant growth in space and support improvements in plant cultivation technologies for future missions. And this is really important, especially as we journey out to the moon, Mars, and beyond, and in order for us to be successful, we really would like to have the opportunity to grow plants on those missions. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the results from this particular experiment. Another experiment that's flying on board Crew-8 involves weightlessness, which causes fluid shift in the body to move toward the head and can cause changes in eye structure and vision, known as spaceflight association neurocular syndrome, or SANS, along with other health problems. Mitigating head where fluid shifts from venoconstructive thigh cuffs during spaceflight, or thigh cuff for short, examines whether thigh pressure cuffs could provide a simple way to counter this shift in body fluids and help protect astronauts from SANS and other issues on future missions to the Moon and Mars. Thigh cuffs could also help treat or prevent problems for patients on Earth who have conditions that cause fluid accumulation in the head, such as long-term bed rest and other diseases. So we'll continue to highlight more of the science that is flying on Crew-8 throughout the rest of the broadcast. But again, we are really looking forward to all of this great science that is flying. In all, there's more than 200 science experiments flying on board Crew-8. So we are coming up on a couple more milestones here as we track towards docking. Again, everything is continuing to go really smoothly. Crew-8 is on their way to the International Space Station. As we mentioned before, there are 3 first-time flyers on board this mission, as well as 1 veteran NASA astronaut, Michael Barratt. And so here soon we should be able to see our first views of the Dragon from the International Space Station as it continues to...
SpaceX Dragon CDR student jump check.
I have you loud and clear. How me?
The same.
We are getting some comms from the core to the crew.
They are working to set up the big loop, which is a integrated communications loop between the International Space Station here in Hawthorne, as well as Mission Control in Houston. So they'll get that set up so that everyone can communicate on the same loop. So they're working through that procedure right now. So at this time, Crew-8 is about 3,250 meters away from the International Space Station. We will continue to see that number get smaller and smaller, of course, throughout our show tonight and as we lead up to docking.
Yes, and if you are just now joining us, we have had a few burns already with Dragon making its way to the International Space Station. We've completed the phase burn, the boost burn, close burn, transfer burn, and the co-elliptic burn, as well as the approach initiation burn. So we are getting closer and closer as Dragon approaches the International Space Station with Crew-8, again with 3 members flying in space for the first time and 1 veteran crew member on board. And we're just about a little over an hour, or a little under an hour and 10 minutes away from that expected contact time with the International Space Station.
And on board the International Space Station, there are currently 7 astronauts and cosmonauts that are living and working as part of Expedition 70. Crew 7 arrived last August, and they return next week. So we'll be covering that on nasa.gov for the latest updates for their return. But Crew 7 includes NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, ESA, or European Space Agency astronaut Andy Mogensen, who is also the current space station commander, as well as JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Satoshi Furukawa, and Konstantin Borisov of Roscosmos. And also on board Space Station is the crew of Soyuz, which launched in September of last year as well. That includes NASA astronaut Laurel O'Hara, who will return to Earth at the end of this month, and Kononenko and Chubb, who are completing a year-long mission and will return later this fall. And soon, NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson will be launching to the International Space Station as well, aboard a Soyuz spacecraft that's currently scheduled for March 21st.
And once Crew-8 docks to the International Space Station for the next several days, 11 humans will be living and working on the space station as Crew-7 and Crew-8 conduct a handover period. The Crew-7 astronauts will bring the new arrivals.
Dragon SpaceX, for awareness, the upcoming approach initiation mid-course burn is in the middle of a TDRS gap that will last for approximately 10 minutes. We will give you the status for that burn after we return at 6:32.
Dragon copies and space status, big loop troubleshooting.
Big loop troubleshooting is still ongoing. We're trying some additional power cycles of equipment on the ISS side. We do have a plan to use the contingency big loop if that becomes necessary, but I will brief you on that once we have more troubleshooting steps completed.
Dragon.
That was the core here in Hawthorne speaking to the crew, giving them an update that we will be coming up on a mid-course burn, which we will not have communications with during that burn. So they will confirm the burn after it is complete and once we have connectivity once again. Again, the Crew-7 astronauts will bring the new arrivals up to speed on everything happening aboard the space station, from emergency procedures to ongoing research. When NASA and SpaceX teams determine whether it is ideal for splashdown, the members of Crew-7 will board Dragon Endeavour, which brought them to the space station almost 6 months ago, and bring them back to Earth.
And as you were saying, soon Crew-7, which arrived back in August after spending 6 months in space, is going to return back to planet Earth. So we're looking forward to that. Of course, you can watch everything from Crew-7 departure to the deorbit burn and splashdown live. And we'll be updating those times on our social media as well as on blogs.nasa.gov. So while we wait for our next milestone, let's take a moment to meet our crew. First up is Commander Matthew Dominick, who hails from Wheat Ridge, Colorado, and is married to Faith Dominick and has 2 daughters. Matthew earned a Master of Science in Systems Engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School, and he was designated as a Naval Aviator in 2007 and reported to Strike Fighter Squadron 106. He made 2 deployments to the North Arabian Sea, flying close air support missions in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and he has accumulated more than 1,600 flight hours in 28 aircraft models, 400 career arrestments, and 61 combat missions. In 2015, he was awarded Naval Test Wing Atlantic Test Pilot of the Year, and this is his very first space flight.
Dr. Michael R. Barratt, Crew-8 pilot, was selected by NASA in 2000. Board certified in internal and aerospace medicine, he participated in 2 space flights, Expedition 19 and 20 in 2009 and STS 133 in 2011, during which he spent a total of 212 days in space. He received his Doctor of Medicine from Northwestern University and completed his residency and master's program in aerospace medicine at Wright State University. In 2011, he was awarded the prestigious Hubertus Strughold Award for contributions to space medicine research. Michael lives in League City, Texas, with his wife, Michelle, and their 5 children.
And this is Mission Specialist Jeanette Epps, and it's her first space flight. She's also a NASA astronaut. The New York native was a NASA fellow during graduate school and worked for Ford Motor Company, where she received a U.S. patent for her research. After leaving Ford, she joined the Central Intelligence Agency, yes, the CIA, for 7 years, working as a technical intelligence officer before becoming an astronaut in 2009. Dr. Epps served as a representative to the Generic Joint Operation Panel working on crew efficiency on the space station, and she was a crew support astronaut for 2 expeditions and served as lead Capcom, or capsule communicator, in Mission Control Houston. Dr. Epps was inducted into the University of Maryland Department of Aerospace Engineering Academy of Distinguished Alumni in 2012.
And another first-time flyer, mission specialist Alexander Grebenkin earned a technical diploma in technical operation of transport radio electronics from the Irkutsk Military Aerospace Engineering Institute in 2002. He also has an engineering degree in radio communications, broadcasting, and television. In 2018, he was accepted in the Cosmonaut Corps and began general space training at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center.
And so the next milestone that we're tracking is the mid-course maneuver burn. It's going to happen a little less than 2 minutes from now. And this is really a fine-tuning burn that's going to just ensure that Dragon is continuing to get in the right spot ahead of docking. So we are tracking that here coming up pretty soon. And this is an automated burn. Dragon's computer determines if the mid-course burn is required. Happens about 25 minutes after the AI burn. Again, it's really just a fine-tuning maneuver. It could be small, it could be a little bit more significant, but it fine-tunes the approach to waypoint 0 because that swing from AI to waypoint 0 is pretty big. So this is a chance for a fine-tuned maneuver ahead of that.
And then following that mid-course burn, we are expecting reaching waypoint 0 around 10:47 p.m. Pacific time tonight. And once we get through waypoint 0, the vehicle can continue to waypoint 2 and then eventually contact the International Space Station, expected at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time.
And as Dragon works to catch up to the International Space Station, it is currently flying 267 statute miles over the Indian Ocean. We are hearing that that burn has begun. So again,
Dragon on the big loop, how do you read?
Dragon, I have you loud and clear. We have resolved our comm issues on the big loop. Please perform a comm check with Houston and station as well.
Copy. Station, Dragon on the big loop, how do you read?
Dragon Station, we have you loud and clear. Welcome.
Great to hear your voice, Jasmine. Houston, Dragon, how do you read on the big loop?
Hey, Bojo, got you loud and clear here in Houston. How me?
Loud and clear, Neil.
So we did hear good confirmation that the big loop is configured. We heard a couple of different voices on the big loop during that communication. First up, we heard the Corps here in Hawthorne, and he was letting the crew of Crew-8 know that the big loop was properly configured, but to go ahead and do a voice check with both the International Space Station and then the ground and mission control. So the commander of Crew-8, Matthew Dominick, called to the International Space Station, and we heard NASA astronaut Jasmine Mugbelly, who's going to continue to help with docking preparations. Once the crew is docked this evening, say that they heard them loud and clear, which is great news.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Mid-course correction maneuver is complete and nominal. Trajectory is converged on waypoint 0.
Dragon copies on the big loop.
And good news that that burn was successful. Everything continuing to tick along properly. And just to continue what I was saying about the big loop there, following the call to the International Space Station, they called to Mission Control Houston, and we heard NASA astronaut Rajachari, who is serving as the Capcom. And if you watched launch last night, he was actually on the broadcast, so he has certainly been busy working hard. So again, we had a great burn. Everything is going really smoothly so far.
We recently got to ask the Crew-8 astronauts why they believe human spaceflight is so important. Here's what they had to say.
Everything we learn on space station enables our technology, it increases our knowledge, and it burns down our risk as we go further.
As explorers, we're looking at ways to further human knowledge, human experience.
Как сказал однажды Константин Эдуардович Циолковский, наша Земля – это колыбель человечества. Но не может человечество все время оставаться в колыбели. Поэтому именно за счет того, что мы нарабатываем сейчас пилотируемыми полетами.
People are so different on Earth. The more people we get into space, the more things we learn about what happens to their body in space, the more we learn to move humanity further to the moon and then ultimately to Mars.
The experiments that we'll conduct help with radiation, how to grow plants in space, how to get the human body to last longer outside of Earth's protection.
In zero gravity, we've actually discovered physiological processes, how the body works, that we didn't even know existed without finding them first in space. That includes mechanisms to lower your blood volume to adapt to a weightless environment, mechanisms that store sodium in your body, which we didn't know existed, ways that the human can control its cardiovascular system that we didn't know existed.
Every single human that's ever been born and ever died has all happened on our planet Earth. And if we want to continue the life of consciousness further, we need to make ourselves multiplanetary.
Just
Go
since
further
we're
we
about 30
will.
minutes
Go
ahead of
further we
schedule,
must.
just wanted to point out
But
the
we
shutter
want to have
constraints
that
and the
tech
exercise
stack
constraints.
in our
Those are all
favor
be
as
going
much
to the
as
left.
possible, and our mission will definitely contribute to that.
Station copies.
And so we did hear a call out about some exercise constraints for the crew on board the International Space Station. This is just a safety precaution so that no loads are imparted on the International Space Station. The crew does have to exercise for several hours a day to keep their bone and muscle health strong in the microgravity environment of the International Space Station. They have a variety of ways in which they can exercise on board, including a treadmill. They have a weightlifting machine, and they also have a stationary bike. And Commander Andy Mogensen from ESA has actually been working on a really exciting experiment throughout this increment where he wears a VR headset while he pedals on the stationary bike. And he's talked about it in interviews, how it really makes a difference and kind of feels like you are back on Earth instead of maybe just looking at a wall or something while you're pedaling on the stationary bike. So I'm excited to see if they'll continue to do that for future crews.
Yeah. That sounds like a pretty amazing way to exercise while you're out in space and maybe even be able to take you to different parts of the world. So we're actually going to check in with Anna Schneider in Houston and see what's happening with the latest on their side of the house. Anna?
Good morning and welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. We are gearing up for this morning's docking and looking forward to having Crew-8 on board station here soon. But before the crew can come aboard, Endeavour will complete its docking and hatch opening operations. NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli will be in the station's cupola using special software to track Dragon's approach and making sure it stays in the expected zones. Once Dragon is docked, Mogbelli will be primed to start hatch opening operations. She'll start by opening a large hatch on node 2 forward to give her access to the pressurized mating adapter. The crew will then have to pressurize the vestibule, which is a small space between the hatches on the Dragon and the space station. This area was exposed to vacuum prior to docking, so the crew will need to fill it with air and make sure the pressure is nearly equal with atmospheric pressure on Dragon and the station. Mogbelli will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the station's vestibule, and flight controllers here in Houston will monitor and verify the pressure readings to make sure everything is leak-free before we open up the hatches. NASA Flight Director Paul Kanya is leading teams here in Mission Control Houston for Dragon's approach and docking, and to their right is Capcom or Capsule Communicator Neil Nagata, who will be communicating with the crew aboard station. Right now, there are 7 astronauts aboard the space station, and that number will jump to 11 once Crew-8 astronauts arrive on board. Again, we're excited to get our Crew-8 astronauts aboard to work on handover with the Crew-7 astronauts, and that's the latest here from Mission Control Houston. Back over to Hawthorne.
Thanks, Anna. So glad to hear that everything is continuing smoothly from the International Space Station side, and we are looking forward to that docking coming up at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time this evening. So the crew on board the International Space Station is currently in their post-sleep period, but following that, they're going to jump right into those docking preparations that Anna was telling us about. Jasmine Mogbelli is going to be prime for all of that vestibule work that Anna just talked through. So we should be seeing her start to get some tools set up and really prepare for Dragon's approach and docking.
We are about 10 minutes away from the next milestone coming up, which will be waypoint 0. And that's when the vehicle is getting closer and closer to the space station. And there's a few...
Station Houston, expect to start monitoring Dragon in approximately 35 minutes.
Station copies, 35 minutes.
And a call out there letting the space station know that Dragon will be arriving in just very shortly, and they should be able to monitor Dragon in about 35 minutes from now.
Yeah, we are less than an hour from that scheduled docking at 11:28 p.m. Pacific. As of this second, Dragon is about 756 meters away from the International Space Station. And so when Crew-8 arrives, like we mentioned earlier, there are 3 first-time flyers on board. To date, there's been 276 visitors to the International Space Station from 22 countries. So those 3 first-time flyers will mark 277, 278, and 279 people to the International Space Station. And another fun fact, point of reference, is that Jeanette Epps, this is her very first space flight. She will be the 76th woman to fly to space. And if you didn't know, it is International Women's History Month. So exciting for Jeanette to check that off during this month especially.
And you can see on your screen a pretty incredible view. This is Dragon looking at the International Space Station, which is where it will be docked for about the next 6 months. So very exciting. You can tell that we're getting closer and closer as the view there is very visible from the Dragon spacecraft.
That's right, and the International Space Station is currently flying 268 statute miles over the South Pacific Ocean. But yeah, we'll continue to see the International Space Station come into better and better view. You can see some of the solar arrays and some of the modules, but again, I'm looking forward to seeing it come into more detail and us sharing a bit more about what you're seeing on your screen. And you can see if you squint between the clouds there, that little white dot, that is Dragon with Crew-8 on board. We'll, again, continue to see this grow larger, but great to see those very first views of Crew-8 and Endeavour. So it does take a lot of work to get to this point to make sure we were launching Dragon and this new crew. Oh, and there's an even better view. You can see the nose cone is open there. That nose cone did open shortly after launch, and it stays open all the way through docking. It exposes that guidance, navigation, and control systems. And that's actually where the crew will enter into the International Space Station once we get docked and have the vestibule repressurized and all those checkouts go smoothly. So there are two flashing lights on board Dragon. There's a green one and there is a red one, and they signal the starboard and port side of the vehicle. This is taken from airplanes. You will see those. They have those to help distinguish as well. And it looks like we just lost our view, but we will regain it here shortly. We have brief handover periods between the tracking and data relay system. And again, now we're getting a view of the International Space Station again from Endeavour. So to talk a little bit more about all the hard work that it takes to get to this point, to the fully functioning orbital laboratory, which you see on board your screen there. Most of the crew is in their post-sleep period like we talked about. They woke up just as we joined the broadcast. And after post-sleep, the crew is getting into those preparations for Dragon arrival. Like we've mentioned a couple times, Jasmine Mugbelly will be in the station's cupola. She'll use that special software to track Dragon's approach and make sure it's staying in the expected zones. Once Dragon is docked, Mugbelly will be primed to move right into hatch operations. She will start by opening the large hatch at node 2 forward, giving her access inside the pressurized mating adapter. The crew will then work to pressurize the vestibule, which is the small space between the hatches on Dragon and the International Space Station. Because this was exposed to vacuum prior to docking, the crew needs to fill it up with air and make sure its pressure is nearly equal with the atmospheric pressure on Dragon and the space station before the crew can come on board. Mugbelly will do this by using a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule. And flight controllers in Houston will monitor the pressure and temperature readings inside to verify that everything is leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches. And of course, preparation began prior to crew arrival to make sure that they do have somewhere to stay, since we'll have a full house of 11 for a few days before Crew 7 departs. So Space Station Commander Andy Mogensen from the European Space Agency moved out of his crew quarters and into a CASA unit, basically a temporary campout space. Meanwhile, JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Satoshi Furukawa, also moved into a temporary space, and he'll be staying in the Japanese Experiment Module, or the GEM. So we are very excited to get those three new astronauts, but 4 astronauts in total aboard, and bring Expedition 70 up to an 11 crew for handover.
Right now, the Expedition 70 crew aboard the station is awake and preparing for Dragon's approach. Right now, there are 7 astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the station. Crew on board Dragon is prime for approach monitoring. Crew on station can follow along, but they're not required to for any abort commanding monitoring. Once docked, the International Space Station crew will be prime for setting up the hardware on the station side to get ready for hatch opening and pre-positioning some ducting that will be used to integrate Dragon's atmosphere with the rest of the station. So a lot of work has already been done, and the station team remains ready for Dragon to arrive in just under an hour from now. And it looks like we got both of those views now looking side by side next to each other. Again, on your left-hand screen, a view from the International Space Station looking at Dragon Endeavour, while the right-hand view is a view from Dragon Endeavour looking at the International Space Station.
And Endeavour is now less than 470 meters from the International Space Station. We're just a few minutes away from reaching waypoint 0. Waypoint 0 is 400 meters below the space station, and this is one of the first checkpoints where the vehicle can hold or continue if all of its systems check out. And if for some reason, in the very highly unlikely situation where we were to lose control of Dragon, it would be at least 4 orbits and about 6 hours before it would move inside the keep out. The team on the ground to work that issue. But again, we are not tracking anything like that. We are not expecting anything like that this evening, but we are coming up on that 400 meters below space station here in just a couple minutes.
And this is actually a very great view to kind of describe where Dragon is relative to the International Space Station. You can see Earth in the background, so you can see that Dragon is below the space station. Once it reaches waypoint 0, it will be 400 meters below the space station, but moving into waypoint 1, it will actually be swinging up and in front of the space station. So you won't be able to see Earth behind it anymore because it'll be in front of the space station. And those views are just really awesome of Earth in the background.
I know, it really is. The space station is flying 265 statute miles over the Tasman Sea off the east coast of New Zealand. They are traveling at 17,500 miles per hour, which means that they see a sunset every 45 minutes and a sunrise every 45 minutes, which if you do the math, it means they are circling the Earth every 90 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon to ground, section 5.1 complete for 4.010. And successful intercom checks.
Copy, Mike. Successful intercom checks. For awareness on timeline, we will have you step into suit leak check after the approach 0 burn is complete.
Copy. Suit leak checks after approach 0.
And so Endeavour is now 435 meters from the International Space Station, closing in on waypoint 0. You do hear some communications from the ground up to the crew just to let them know they're going to wait for this burn to complete before they begin those suit leak checks. The crew is in those spacesuits and will remain in them through docking, but first they're going to complete some leak checks just to make sure that everything is as it should be. In case there were a depressurization scenario, the crew would be able to be A-OK in those spacesuits.
And again, as we approach these different checkpoints, waypoint 0, waypoint 1, waypoint 2, they're actually just checkpoints. The vehicle will be monitoring its position, and if everything checks out, it can just continue to make its way to the next
SpaceX
checkpoint.
Dragon to ground, complete with 4.010.
Copy. Suit donning procedure complete.
And we are less than 1 minute until waypoint 0.
And Dragon, with that, I would like to bring cameras back on board.
And SpaceX Dragon, you are good to come on board. Welcome.
And with that, we do expect to get our first views on board Endeavour here shortly.
The suit's primary function is to protect the crew in the event of a cabin depressurization. If that were to occur, the suit would inflate and provide a habitable environment long enough for the crew to return home. The flame-resistant materials on the outer layer also protect the crew in the event of a fire. And these are custom-tailored suits to each one of these astronauts. They are a single-piece suit. This means that the helmet, gloves, and boots all remain attached. The helmet is actually made of 3D printed nylon and has a visor that pivots open, which you may see when we see the crew when they open and close their visors. The quick disconnect, or QD, on the right thigh mates to an umbilical on the seat. This is what provides the air ventilation, oxygen, nitrox for pressurization, and allows the electronics to be connected all from a single location on the suit. A tubing network inside of the suit also delivers air to the neck and limbs to keep the crew cool while wearing the suit, because it is, covering them, probably keeping them a bit warm. So the air flowing through helps keep them cool. The suit's communication system consists of helmet.
Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop. Approach 0 is in progress and trajectory has converged on waypoint 0. Arrival at waypoint 0 at approximately 1711. And with that, you are good to proceed into 4.011 for leak checks.
Dragon copies, stepping into 4.011, suit leak check.
And good calls there. They have confirmed that we have made it to waypoint 0 and that the crew is good to perform their suit leak checks inside of the cabin there.
And Crew-8 has passed through waypoint 0, which is that 400-meter checkpoint below space station. Right now, it looks like they're about 381 meters away from the International Space Station. So as we begin to move closer to waypoint 1, which is our next milestone, a couple of things are going to happen. The sensors on Dragon are going to work to basically get a lock on the docking port that it's targeting. And once they do eventually dock, that soft capture ring will automatically capture the docking port, and then we will work to close those latches.
Dragon on the Big Loop, ready to pressurize.
Dragon SpaceX, you are go to initiate suit leak checks.
Happy to go.
And there you heard some comms that they are beginning their suit leak checks. Again, they do put their suits on during the dynamic events of docking. So they are doing some suit leak checks to make sure everything is working properly with their suits before they dock to the International Space Station. So they are pressurizing those suits right now inside of Dragon. They'll do this leak check and then make sure that everything is good. And if so, then they can proceed towards docking to the International Space Station. And speaking of these suits, these are intravehicular activity suits, or IVA suits, and they're designed for use inside of Dragon. So when the astronauts move onto the International Space Station, the suits will stay on board Dragon. They will no longer need them inside of the International Space Station. The astronauts will then use NASA's extravehicular activity, or EVA suits, when they need to go outside of the International Space Station. Those are actually designed for the purpose of being outside and in space, versus our IVA suits are made for solely internally inside of Dragon.
And speaking of EVAs or spacewalks, you're getting a view at the top of your screen there of the Canadarm2. That is a tool that is sometimes used during spacewalks to maneuver crew members to different parts of the International Space Station. It can also be used to help move payloads around and place different science experiments on the external portion of the International Space Station.
And now, as we mentioned earlier, you can see a little bit difference of view. You no longer see Earth in the background, and that is because Dragon is moving and swinging itself up and in front of the International Space Station.
And we are about to enter an orbital nighttime as well, so we might see a little more darkness than we did before. but getting some great views of Endeavour. Again, you can see that nose cone, which is open. It was open shortly after launch, and again, will remain open all the way through docking up until the point that Crew-8 comes home, at which point it is closed to help protect all of that guidance and navigation equipment as the crew re-enters the Earth's atmosphere.
Good super check.
Copy, we see the same.
And we are hearing that there were 4 good leak checks on board Crew Dragon Endeavour. So another milestone as we continue to press towards docking at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time this evening.
Sandra, you mentioned orbital nighttime. Once we get to waypoint 2, everything is pretty much automated, but sometimes you get a little bit more light than you would like on the docking adapter. And so Dragon will actually pause approximately 220 meters away from, or excuse me, 20 meters away from the International Space Station, make sure that it can actually see and be confirm that it's fully aligned with the International Space Station before it begins that docking procedure.
And we are about 15 minutes away from waypoint 1. Dragon is 354 meters away from the space station. And so we were talking a little bit about the orbital daytime and nighttime. So I know sometimes back on Earth it can be a little confusing with all the different time zones across the world, but on board the International Space Station they use GMT, which is Greenwich Mean Time, and that helps everyone stay on the same time across the world. Everyone's tracking that same time zone.
And you can see that Dragon kind of drifted off the screen there. It's a good reminder that the vehicles, both the International Space Station and Dragon, are moving very quickly, even though it does look like they're moving very slow relative to each other. And as Dragon approaches and gets closer and closer, we have to continue to adjust the camera to keep the Dragon or the International Space Station in sight of each other.
Now just about 30 minutes, 31 minutes or so away from docking at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time this evening. We talked about some of the science that the crew is going to be doing on board the International Space Station, over 200 science experiments, but they also are expected to see a couple of really exciting visitors during their mission. That is the Boeing crewed flight test this spring, where NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams will spend a week or so on board the International Space Station, targeted for April, where they will complete a test checkout flight of their Boeing vehicle.
And what you're seeing on your screen is our mission controls here at SpaceX as well as NASA. And SpaceX Mission Control is based in our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. From here, our teams are monitoring Dragon and checking in on all of its systems. To help make sure that the crew has a safe journey, our team in Mission Control will be monitoring, or is currently monitoring, the progress all along the way. Now, on console or headset are 6 key positions who are monitoring the health of the vehicle and the crew. The mission director responsible for mission success is in charge in the room. The person that you've been hearing talking to the astronauts is the crew operations and resources engineer, or you may have heard us refer to them as the core. The other positions are also focused on vehicle systems like navigation and control, avionics, software, propulsion, life support, and communications with ground segments.
And back in Mission Control Houston, that Mission Control Center is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Team members there are trained in a variety of disciplines and monitor all of space station systems. Just like Mission Control in Hawthorne, we have someone dedicated to talk to the crew members to streamline communications. This keeps the astronauts from needing multiple conversations on different subjects. This role is called the CAPCOM, which stands for Capsule Communicator. However, this person isn't talking with the capsule like the name might suggest. That's SpaceX's core, but the CAPCOM is speaking with the astronauts already living aboard the International Space Station. The CAPCOM sits right next to the flight director, and the flight director gathers information and data from all flight controllers and leads the team through major milestones. They approve or decline suggestions based on pre-established flight rules as well. And tonight's flight director is Paul Kanya. Another key member of the team inside Mission Control Houston is the ADCO, who controls the attitude or orientation of the space station. We also have the VVO, which is the visiting vehicle officer, who monitors and works with external teams sending spacecraft to and from the International Space Station. There's also a flight surgeon who the astronauts get a chance to speak with on a regular schedule on a private conference line. If you were listening in a little bit earlier in the broadcast, you actually did hear that call out about having a quick medical check with the flight surgeon. So that happens regularly on the flight uphill as well as on board the International Space Station during their increment. Another console position that we have is Robo, who works with the Canadarm2 to maneuver it to complete work outside the space station. When astronauts are in a spacewalk, the Canadarm2 can be maneuvered by an astronaut within the space station to move them around the International Space Station. There are many other positions and team members who monitor the station's solar arrays, the astronauts' schedules, and even where every single piece of equipment and cargo is stored. So it takes a tough and competent team to make a mission successful. And as you see on your screen there, though, that is just the crew that, or rather the mission control team that is working this Crew-8 Dragon docking. But again, Mission Control Houston is staffed 24/7, 365.
And it's pretty incredible to see the teams working together and how smooth this all goes. I know that there's a lot going on in both mission controls, but from launch, while Dragon is in orbit, mission control in space at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, is communicating with the crew. And then there's this tandem period, which is what we're currently in right now. And both mission controls are working with the crew on Dragon as well as the International Space Station. Once the crew docks to the International Space Station, that will be handed over to NASA's Mission Control Houston. So just great teamwork all around, and really incredible to see how so many people can work together and collaborate to make something like this happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we actually call this time period that we're in right now integrated operations, when Hawthorne and Mission Control Houston are really integrated, working together through these dynamic phases of flight. And I did hear that the ISS team back in Mission Control Houston did pull go to proceed through waypoint 1 and through waypoint 2. Endeavour is closing in on 300 meters away from the International Space Station.
We are just about 25 minutes from the expected contact time of 11:28 p.m. Pacific time.
So many of you may be familiar with the idea of a mission patch, but maybe you don't know how they came to exist. For decades, crew members have worked together to develop the patch for their mission, determining which aspects of the mission they want to highlight and any special details they'd like to include. The crew themselves can design their patch, or they can share their design ideas with an artist who makes it come to life. NASA's SpaceX Crew-8 mission will maintain a continuous human research presence in low Earth orbit. In their patch, the crew is represented by the never-ending path of a Latin numeral 8, with the Dragon bowing with respect to its destination, the International Space Station, which they will arrive at here at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time this evening.
I really love the patches for these missions, and I love that the crew has the ability to put their, own personal touch on those patches, because it's such a meaningful, symbolic representation of their mission. So really cool to see what Crew-8 came up with, and love the design. Also, another unique part of our crew launches is the zero-G indicators, and love that we got some really good words from the crew, from the commander, once they made it to space and the zero-G indicator was released. It was actually a stuffed dog that was chosen by his daughter, and represented parents, constantly working very hard and going out in the world to essentially change the world, and their kids, being their support system. And I thought that was I love that story behind that. And so it's just another thing where they can put their personal touch and have something very personal with them on board Crew Dragon.
Yeah, that was a very special sentiment. Great to hear that from the commander, Matthew Dominick, who this is his very first space flight. And if you are just tuning in, we have just about less than 30 minutes now until Dragon is expected to dock with the International Space Station following their launch from the Kennedy Space Center last night at 10:53 p.m. Eastern Time. Dragon is now 280 meters away from the International Space Station, and we are coming up on waypoint 1 in a couple of minutes from now. That waypoint 1 milestone will move Dragon in front of the station, approximately 220 meters away, and moves it directly in front of its docking port. For this particular mission, Dragon is docking to the Node 2 forward port. There's also a Node 2 zenith port. And the distinction between those two, Node 2 forward is actually facing towards the Earth, whereas Node 2 zenith is facing towards space. And you might also hear Node 2 referred to as Harmony. They're the same thing. And yeah, so as you can see in this graphic here, Dragon is working to swing its way up and be directly in front of that docking port. That puts us right in line with the docking axis. And once Dragon reaches that docking axis, it has about 20 hours of power, so it could hold there if needed for quite some time and could reattempt to dock if necessary, but everything is proceeding well and on track for docking today at 11:28 p.m. Pacific.
Along the way, Dragon Endeavour has made some stops at some various points upon approach. These different waypoints allow teams to evaluate the status of the vehicle and the readiness of the space station to receive it. These checkpoints include outside the keep-out sphere and the approach ellipsoid, which are two invisible boundaries around the station. Both of these boundaries are monitored for all visiting vehicles, whether crew or cargo.
Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop. Approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue approach to waypoint 2.
Dragon copies on the Big Loop.
And as we continue to make our approach from waypoint 1 to waypoint 2 and make our final approach, a couple of things will happen that you might hear over. Oh, and here we are getting our very first views inside of the Dragon Endeavour. The crew there is suited up, as you can see. They're just continuing to monitor the screens on board Dragon. This is an automated process, but the crew can take over if needed up to a point right before docking called CHOP. You'll hear that called out, and that's the crew hands-off period. And from that point on, it is a fully automated docking.
And it may be hard to tell what's on your screen, but right now this is a view from Dragon looking at the space station as it is making its way to waypoint 2. Again, that will align Dragon with the docking adapter on the space station. And
it looks like we are getting a space selfie. You got to capture the moment.
That is
wow,
excellent.
How special.
Even astronauts take selfies.
Dragon is about 236 meters away from the International Space Station currently. And the International Space Station is currently flying 259 statute miles, about to cross, it's in the North Pacific Ocean right now, flying across the North Pacific Ocean, but here in just a few minutes, it's actually going to cross over California and fly right overhead in San Francisco. So if you are in San Francisco and you do not have the Spot the Station app downloaded, you might have just enough time to download it and head outside and be able to look at where the International Space Station is flying overhead. Looks like the space station is going to make a pass across Nevada and up across the northern United States. So if you are in any of those further places along the track, you might be able to look up and see it. We did just release a new Spot the Station app at the end of last year that improves some of the tracking on that application. So really special to see the International Space Station fly overhead. If you haven't, I strongly encourage you all to download that app.
Again, what you're seeing on your screen is a view from the International Space Station looking at Dragon, and it's looking at basically the forward hatch with the nose cone deployed, exposing the four forward bulkhead thrusters that are on Dragon.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Monitor Dragon approach for step 3 of 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Let us know when your review is complete and you are ready for docking.
Houston Station copies. Welcome.
And that was the voice of NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, who is going to be prime for docking operations to help pressurize the vestibule, get everything ready to go before the hatches can be opened once Dragon docks. We're now less than 20 minutes away from docking, continuing to get views inside Dragon Endeavour. On the left of your screen is the commander of Endeavour, Matthew Dominick. It's his very first space flight. And to his right is Mike Barratt, who is a veteran NASA astronaut. There's also 2 more individuals inside the capsule. One on the far left, who we can't see right now, but that is NASA astronaut Jeanette Epps, who this is also her first time space flight. And then on the right of the screen, which again, we don't have a view of them right now, but that is Roscosmos cosmonaut Konstantin Borisov.
Houston Station, ready for docking.
Houston copies.
And we did just hear from NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli on board the International Space Station that from their end, everything is ready to go. They're ready for Dragon to dock. We are still targeting an 11:28 p.m. Pacific time docking this evening.
And the station Houston on the Big Loop. At waypoint 2, Dragon will briefly pause to align for docking and then automatically resume the approach.
Station copies.
Just some good comms there. Just a reminder that when Dragon reaches waypoint 2, it will pause to align with the docking system, but then we'll continue to move forward with approaching the International Space Station.
And so at this time, we are within that keep out sphere, which is a 200-meter radius. It's an invisible line around the International Space Station. This keep out sphere means that if something were to happen with Dragon, there would be a 4-orbit safe while outside of that. But again, everything's continuing to go really smoothly. The next major milestone that we'll see is about 20 meters from the space station when we'll arrive at waypoint 2. And at this point, Dragon will focus on aligning its docking system with the IDA on the space station's commanded attitude. And once we get to waypoint 2, it's usually about a 5-minute period before we have contact and capture. So coming up on waypoint 2 arrival here shortly.
The view that you're seeing on your screen is a view inside of Dragon Endeavour with the commander on the left-hand side, pilot on your right-hand side, and they're just monitoring those displays there. Again, Dragon is an autonomous vehicle. They do have the ability to take over manual control if necessary, but you may hear a call out for CHOP, that is the crew hands-off period, and that's when the Dragon must take over and will be, if an abort is necessary, Dragon will have to make that autonomous decision.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. Soft capture ring extension is complete.
Second copy.
So we are now almost 100 meters away from the International Space Station. Right now it's looking at about 115 meters. And we are in a orbital nighttime. Again, I did mention that the International Space Station was flying across the United States. Right now, it is flying across Montana. Just flew overhead Billings and approaching Miles City. And soon it's going to be approaching North Dakota, at which point it will cross into Canada and fly overhead of Ontario, Canada. Fly overhead of Ontario, Canada.
We did hear a call out that the soft capture ring has been extended. This soft capture ring will help a soft capture to the International Space Station. And once that soft capture is confirmed, then that soft capture ring will retract, and then we will have hooks for a hard capture to the International Space Station.
So again, that next major milestone that we are tracking ahead towards is waypoint 2. That's 20 meters from space station. Continuing to close in, now less than 100 meters away, 91 meters, now 90 meters actually. And again, these views inside Endeavour, on the left is the commander, Matthew Dominick, his very first space flight, and to his right is veteran NASA astronaut Mike Barratt. We're just about 3 minutes out from waypoint 2. And less than 10 minutes until docking at targeted time of 11:28 p.m. Pacific. These are views of Dragon from the International Space Station. You can see some of those lights flashing. And while we are looking forward to docking at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time, just about 8 minutes from now, let's head back over to Mission Control Houston and check in with Anna to see how things are going over there.
Thanks, Sandra. Right now, the team here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room is actually conducting the go, no-go poll for docking.
Dragon,
and then the crew
SpaceX
aboard
on
the International
Big Loop.
Space Station.
Dragon, Houston and Hawthorne have pulled go for docking. Confirm you are ready for approach 2. We are sending the approach allowed flag now.
We see the approach allowed flag to true, and we're closing visors.
Copy, visors closed. And one additional reminder, once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off points, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Copy, 4 visors closed.
And we just heard confirmation that both the NASA and SpaceX teams have pulled go for docking, and the crew aboard
Station
the
Houston on a
Dragon
big
Endeavour
loop.
spacecraft.
Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor for steps 5 and 6 in 1.102. Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copies monitoring for steps 5 and 6 of Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
And we just heard good words that NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, who's currently aboard the International Space Station in the station's cupola monitoring docking, is good for docking to proceed, and the Dragon crew aboard Endeavour has their visors down and are prepared for the final approach and docking in just a few minutes from now. Again, everything is continuing to look good here on the station side. And the voice you heard of NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, who will be in the station's cupola, she'll be using special software to track Dragon's approach and ensuring the vehicle stays in the expected zones. And then she will also be primed for hatch opening operations once Dragon is docked. During these operations, she'll start by opening the large hatch on node 2 forward, giving her access into the pressurized mating adapter. The crew will then pressurize the vestibule, which is the small space between the hatches on the Dragon and Space Station. This area was previously exposed to vacuum prior to docking, so the crew will need to fill it with air and ensure that its pressure is nearly equal with the atmospheric pressure on both Dragon and Space Station. Mogbelli will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the station's vestibule. Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor and verify the pressure readings to make sure everything is leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches. The entire process will take a couple of hours to complete. We're still on track for a docking in just a few minutes, followed by a hatch opening a couple of hours following that, and then we will round it all out with a welcome ceremony as Crew-8 officially joins the Expedition 70 crew currently aboard the International Space Station. Again, everything continuing to proceed smoothly from here in Mission Control Houston. Back over to Hawthorne.
Thanks so much, Anna. Great to hear that everything is going smoothly from the Mission Control Houston side. We are getting a view right now from node 2 forward or from Harmony where Dragon is slowly coming in to dock to the International Space Station. Right now, Dragon is about 22 meters away. And so soon we may hear that call out for CHOP, which is crew hands off period. From this point, everything will be automated and the crew will not have to do anything. If there is some type of situation that comes up, Dragon's computers would handle that from that point. So we are just about 20 meters away from capture.
And once Dragon does make a soft capture to the International Space Station, there's still a few things that the vehicle needs to do to make sure that it does complete a hard capture. Following the soft capture ring will retract until the sensors indicate that it's time for the hooks to drive in place. And there's 2 sets of hooks. There will be 6 to start, followed by another 6. And once those hooks are in place, then it can attach its umbilical, and that will conclude the hard capture for Dragon. So even once Dragon approaches the International Space Station, there are still a few events that do need to happen to confirm that hard capture.
Meters.
Copy, 15 meters.
So you did hear that call out that Dragon is now less than 15 meters away from the International Space Station, continuing to close in slowly. We'll hear that call out for CHOP, crew hands off point 2 meters before contact. Now approaching 10 meters away from the International Space Station.
Five meters.
Copy, 5 meters.
Should hear the call out for CHOP shortly.
Two meters.
Copy, 2 meters and hands off.
There was that call. Standing by for contact and capture.
1 meter.
Copy, 1 meter. Soft capture confirmed.
And contact confirmed. Dragon made contact with the International Space Station at 11:28 p.m. Pacific while flying central over the North Atlantic Ocean just east of Newfoundland.
And there are still a few steps to complete before Dragon is securely attached to the station. Again, we do have soft capture, but then we will retract that soft capture ring. Then we can start driving in the hard capture hooks. Again, there will be 2 sets of 6 hooks each. Once those hooks...
Ring retraction in progress.
There's that call out that the soft capture ring is now being retracted. And then shortly we should hear that the first 6 hooks will begin to drive in for that hard capture.
And so if you are just joining us, we did have Crew-8 successfully docked to the International Space Station just a minute ago at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time. On board Crew-8 are 4 astronauts, and there you can see a view of Endeavour docked to the International Space Station. That's the forward port of Harmony. On board Dragon are 3 first-time flyers and 1 veteran NASA astronaut. And so Dragon will remain docked to the International Space Station throughout their mission. They are targeting a 6-month-long mission aboard the International Space Station.
Now, it does take a few minutes for that soft capture ring retraction to complete, and then it will take another few minutes for hard capture with the 12 hooks that will drive into the International Space Station to hard dock to the International Space Station. So we should expect that soft capture ring retraction completion in just a couple minutes from now.
And once soft capture is complete, we will have those hard capture rings you were talking about begin to engage. There's 12 of them in total, but they'll engage in 2 groups of 6. So the first 6 will engage, and then the other 6 will engage. And at that point, we'll have a successful hard capture docking.
There will also be an umbilical that does attach from Dragon to the International Space Station. So while Dragon does have its own internal battery power, while it's docked to the station, it will connect with the International Space Station's power.
That's right, and you do see the nose cone, which is open there at the very front of your screen. Now that you see it docked, it makes a lot of sense why it needs to be open so that all that guidance and navigation control system can be exposed. But again, this is the hatch that the crew will actually float through once they go aboard the International Space Station after that vestibule is pressurized and all those leak checks are completed. So that won't happen right away. It is a bit of a process, but we will be providing coverage throughout that. So stick with us, and then you'll be able to see the crew float aboard the International Space Station for the first time. Another thing to point out here is that on the back end of Dragon is the trunk that's still attached. That will remain attached throughout the duration of the time that Crew-8 is aboard the International Space Station. That is
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Ring retraction is complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Copy the big loop.
So good news, the soft capture ring has drawn in successfully, but before we start to engage those hooks, we're going to do another reconfiguration of the MCS. That's the motion control system on board station during approach and initial contact. So during that portion of flight, we are under all of our attitude controllers being done by the Roscosmos segment. So we do that with any approaching visiting vehicle, but now that docking has occurred, we're going to hand over control back to the US gyroscopes, which we do in our normal day-to-day attitude control. And so that puts station in a little bit more of a kind of quiescent mode. Won't be able to make any rapid adjustments that could interfere with the driving of those hooks. So as soon as the teams have confirmed that we've handed over attitude control over to the US system, we'll be able to start driving in those 12 hooks to secure Dragon in place. But I did just want to point out really briefly on the trunk there, you see a portion of it that is darker black in color. That's actually the solar arrays that stay on board Dragon and before the trunk is jettisoned rather. And so previous versions of Dragon had solar arrays that expanded, right?
Yes, they did expand almost like wings, but in this version of Dragon, they stay attached. No need to extend them. They stay right there on the trunk, just as is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Station Easton on the big loop. MCS is configured, proceeding with hook driving.
And we did.
Station, we see it, thanks.
We did hear that confirmation that the motion control system, or MCS, has successfully been handed over. So now we're going to begin driving those hooks. Again, there's 12 in total. They'll drive in 2 groups of 6. Takes about 5 minutes or so for the hooks to drive. And this is the second time in the flight that we've done something with these hooks. They also are used shortly after liftoff, once Dragon is inserted into a nominal or normal orbit. Because they help to hold the nose cone closed during ascent, they were used to open up and expose the nose cone, which again, you see on your screen there is open and is required for Dragon to dock. That first set of hooks is continuing to drive. And here we have a view inside Endeavour. On the left is Commander of Crew-8, Matthew Dominick. Again, this is his first time to space. Really looking forward to seeing him on board the International Space Station here. About an hour and 45 minutes or so after docking is when we're targeting hatch opening. It could be a little sooner or a little bit later. It's a bit fluid. It depends how those leak checks go and how long it takes to pressurize the vestibule. And so while those hooks drive, the crew is going to remain in their spacesuits, but once they work through a few more procedures, they will have the opportunity to get out of their seats and their suits and move freely about the cabin and essentially start to get ready to open up the hatches. They'll hook up their suits to a couple of fans to help dry them actually before they get stowed. And again, they'll have a few tasks that they'll be working on before they get ready to open up the hatch.
What you're seeing on your screen is a view of mission control here in Hawthorne, California. This team is still currently monitoring the crew, even though they are attached to the International Space Station. We're currently in progress of hard capture. And they will still monitor the crew until they are safely on board the International Space Station, which even after hard capture, there are still a few events that need to happen. Pressurizing the vestibule that will keep both the Dragon spacecraft and International Space Station safe as they open up the hatch from Dragon to allow the Crew-8 members on board the International Space Station.
And we do have confirmation that that first set of hooks has been driven successfully. So now the next set is underway. And once that is complete, that will be called a hard mate. A full seal is achieved with 12 hard capture hooks, but only 11 hooks are required to declare success in order to have a little bit of redundancy. And if you are just joining us, 10 minutes ago, Crew-8 docked to the International Space Station, the forward port of Harmony. They docked while the International Space Station and Dragon were flying over the North Atlantic, just east of Newfoundland.
Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop. Hard capture is complete.
Hard copies on the Big Loop.
And so we did hear that that second set of hooks was successfully driven. So we do have a hard capture, everything looking really good. That's what we want to hear. That will allow us to move in, excuse me, to the hatch opening procedures. As Anna mentioned from Mission Control Houston, it will take a bit of time. They have to repressurize the vestibule before they can open up the hatches, but we are targeting hatch opening about an hour and 45 minutes following docking, which again occurred at 11:28 p.m. Pacific time this evening. And so once that vestibule is repressurized, we may hear some communication back and forth about a cartridge, a LiO canister. This is a lithium hydroxide canister that is used to help scrub CO2 from the Dragon cabin during free flight. So sometimes they'll remove that and seal it before they enter on board the International Space Station. This helps to integrate Dragon's cabin with the rest of the space station atmosphere. So not only will Dragon be able to use station power, station data and communications, but also that air will flow into Dragon and integrate with all of its other life support systems and generate oxygen scrubbing.
Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop docking sequence is complete. So with that, Crew Dragon Endeavour, welcome to the International Space Station. We would also like to note that you can't be crew late when you arrive 30 minutes early.
SpaceX Dragon on the Big Loop, copies all. So excited to be here, and thank you to all the teams that got us here so much.
Dragon, from those of us on board, welcome to the International Space Station. We disagree, you still can be crew late. Mike, welcome back. We think a few things have changed since you left. Matt, Jeanette, Sasha, you're going to absolutely love it here.
Good to hear your voice, Jasmine, and looking forward to seeing you in just a moment.
Absolutely. I'm both excited and sad because it means I'm leaving soon.
And those words from the ground up to the crew, poking a little fun at them. We were watching the weather in the ascent corridor leading up to this launch. So we had to delay just a little bit. So no longer are they crew late, though, because they are on board station.
Ground, just looking for a go to doff suits.
Dragon, you have a go to doff suits per 4.012. I will be bringing the cameras external shortly, and as we are going to target an expedited ingress, once suits are doffed, I'll give you some updated instructions for 4.400.
Dragon copies all.
Some great words there. The crew is now able to begin doffing their suits, which I'm sure they're pretty excited about after the journey to the International Space Station. Now that Dragon has completed the docking sequence, the spacecraft must undergo a handful of checks before we will be able to open the hatch. The crew on board Dragon will now get a chance to get out of their suits before moving into those hatch operations.
That's right, and things will be picking up inside the space station too as NASA's Jasmine Mogbelli gets the hatch on the station side ready to be opened and starts pressurizing that area known as the vestibule between the Dragon and station hatches. With Dragon docked, that's going to do it for us here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew-8 won't stop there. Be sure to continue tuning in from Mission Control Houston. We're going to toss it over to Anna and Mission Control Houston to take us through the vestibule depressurization and hatch opening. We'll see NASA astronauts Matthew Dominick, Michael Barratt, Jeanette Epps, and Alexander Grebenkin float into the International Space Station. But for us here in Hawthorne, that is going to do it. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome aboard, Crew-8.
It was great to see Dragon safely dock to the International Space Station to bring another crew of astronauts aboard to conduct important science and research over the next 6 months. Again, Dragon Endeavour docked to the International Space Station. And we just heard confirmation from NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli, who is inside the International Space Station working on those hatch opening operations. She just confirmed that the hatch on Node 2 forward has been opened, and this will allow her to have access inside the pressurized mating adapter.
SpaceX Dragon, turn around.
Go ahead, Dragon.
The driver for expedited ingress is not as strong as necessary. It's just, we don't have to go crazy.
Copy that.
Houston Station on the big loop, APAS equalization valve closed at 0752.
All right, copy that.
Dragon SpaceX on Dragon to ground. If desired, you can reference procedure 4.400 for monitoring vestibule pressurization. That would be section 4.
We are continuing to work through some hatch opening procedures. NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbelli is primed for these procedures. She has already opened the large hatch at Node 2 forward to give her access inside the pressurized mating adapter. Now we are working to pressurize the vestibule.
SpaceX Dragon now on the big loop. We heard you make a call and they're going to ground with no reply.
That's correct. It was just directing you towards 4.400 section 4 to monitor vestibule pressurization. We have a little bit of trouble with the audio link on Dragon to ground right now, so you can just direct all calls on big loop.
Copy, Wilco, stay on the big loop, and we're monitoring section 4.400.
Again, they are currently working to pressurize the vestibule. The vestibule is the small space between the hatches on Dragon and the space station. This area was previously exposed to the vacuum of space prior to docking, and we need to fill it with air and make sure its pressure is nearly equal with the atmospheric pressures on both Dragon and the space station. You just heard some calls between the crew on the big loop. The crew on Dragon is monitoring this pressurization process. As part of these pressurization procedures, NASA astronaut Jasmine McBelly, who is on the International Space Station and a part of Expedition 70, is using a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule, and flight controllers here in Houston are monitoring the pressure and temperature readings inside and verifying that everything is leak-free before we can open the hatches.